Hello and welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast. My name is Kevin Teeler. I'm your podcast host. And my guest this week is Colleen Stanley, who is the President and Chief Selling Officer of SalesLeadership, Inc. Colleen, how are you today?
I am great. How are you?
I'm absolutely fab, thank you. It's Friday tomorrow. I'm wishing the week
we're
away.
on opposite sides of the ocean, as we call it.
Yeah, absolutely. We are. Yeah. So where are you calling in from today?
Denver, Colorado.
Very nice. I say very nice. Of course, I've never been there.
You need to come. We've got mountains, rivers, great climate. You'd enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm sure I would. Have you lived there a long time?
I have lived here 24 years. So I grew up in the Midwest, but this is home.
Yeah, right. We're just always confused by the scale, the sheer size of the country that you live in. It's an enormous place. And
I think people in the United States forget that. Like every night in the news, my husband and I kind of laugh because there's always some report on the weather. And I said, if they were reporting in Europe, somebody's having bad weather someplace in Europe. Yeah. I think in the US, we're like, oh my gosh, we get a little too worried about it.
We're obsessed by the weather over here because traditionally in the UK, the weather changes so quickly. We're sort of the location as a small island relatively off the coast of Europe, and the first stop for weather coming in from your country, it changes a lot. So we've always been obsessed by it. As we record, this is actually a very sunny period, so we're all feeling quite chipper and cheerful. It won't be long before we start feeling guilty about it, though. It'll just be, we can't enjoy too much good weather too long without feeling guilty about it in the UK.
Enjoy.
I think so. So, Colleen, what is it you get paid to do now?
Well, we get paid to teach emotional intelligence skills and consultative selling skills and sales management skills to, salespeople, individual producers, corporations. And then within that, we also deliver a lot of keynotes, sales kickoffs and retreats.
Oh, it sounds like a fantastic thing to do. How long have you been doing this for?
It has been 24 years. I was a VP of sales prior to this, so started really in my sales career with a startup that then went quite large. I guess we went public. And so I have kind of done very, very scrappy sales where you had no marketing, you had no leads, to where we got fairly sophisticated about how we went to market. So I always tell my clients I can do both sides. So don't worry if you're not there yet. I have been that scrappy salesperson working without a lot of knowledge or information.
And is this the career you had in mind at 16?
No. Okay. I grew up in a farming community in the great state of Iowa, and it was a town of 900. So my goal was to be a medical secretary. And because the great news about growing up in a small town is a lot of freedom. You don't have to be good to try. So you really learn a lot of risk taking in a kind of a strange backwards way. However, what you don't learn is what else is out there. So when I went to look for a school on medical secretary, we saw a 4-year university, and my mom says, well, should we check it out? And so we literally went up the hill, checked it out. They had a 2-year medical secretary program. And then that's when I got exposed to a bigger world and went on and got a 4-year degree.
So how did you end up in a sales career then? How did that happen?
Well, I'd love to say it was a really strategic move. I would call it luck. So I was in my 30s, and I was really a Girl Friday for a sales representative in the Jostens business. And in the United States, that's graduation caps and gowns, class rings, graduation announcements. And so this is quite serendipitous. His boss comes down from Minnesota and, kind of takes me aside and he said, there's a little company down in Memphis, Tennessee that you should call on. They're just starting to build out their direct sales force. Now, keep in mind, Kevin, I'm a Girl Friday. I'm not really the salesperson. But again, growing up in that small town, you don't have to be good to try. You just have to show up. So I kept calling Varsity Spirit Corporation, Varsity Brands Today. And finally, they returned my call. And that was my entree into sales. Straight commission, 1 day of training, then go get them. Good luck. So
it sounds like a pretty tough baptism of fire.
Well, it's interesting. I've worked more straight commission when I've been in a sales role. I've never had a salary, actually, when I've been in a sales role. In a management role, I have. So, yes, it will definitely get you up and going quite quickly when you're working straight commission.
Yeah, absolutely. No basic salary, nothing.
No, we were paying our own expenses. We were figuring out our own territories. I mean, there wasn't when I look at what we really have available today for people to be successful, it's wonderful. But at the same time, that's when I wonder, why is anyone whining? Because, I was literally building my own list, trying to figure out who is a prospect, who is a customer. So it took a great deal of resiliency, which is what I believe the future of sales is really going to hold for us.
Oh, that's a nice segue into what we're going to talk about today as our main topic, isn't it?
Well, resiliency is one of the many soft skills.
Yeah.
And I do believe it's one that I'm seeing become more and more important, especially in this day and age of where it's just constant change. It's one that I think you need to hire for. And once you even get that individual on board, continue to train them on building resiliency skills and muscles.
Well, let's think about that a little more first. But before we get into that, the key question I wanted to ask you is this. Are great salespeople born or made, Colleen?
I think it's a combination of both. The nature is, are you somebody that really does like meeting with people? Do you have a more analytical bent? But at the same time, I've seen a lot of people that have what I call a natural maybe talent for meeting with people, high on likability, building relationships. But the fact is they're not resilient. They lack delayed gratification skills. They're not really a learner. So all of that talent just stays there. So I think it's a combination of both.
You do. So so let's drill into this a little bit and let's see which we think is more important. What about attitude? You're marketing an EQ, emotional quotient, attitude enhancement solution, I suppose, really, to make it a very wordy thing. Could you start with defining what EQ is for us?
Well, emotional intelligence, there's many definitions out there. So let's try to distill them down into a comprehensive one. It can be recognizing your own emotions and how those affect how you show up in daily life, business or personal, but it's also that ability to tune into somebody else's emotional state. And at that point, manage your emotional response or adapt your behavior to that individual. So it's really a lot around self-awareness. That is actually the meta skill when you take a look at emotional intelligence, because the old adage is that which you're not aware of, you cannot change, and that which you're not aware of, you're bound to repeat.
And do you think that most salespeople are self-aware?
Your good salespeople are self-aware, but like any muscle, the self-awareness needs to continue to be coached and a focus put on, because in this very, very busy world, what happens is people maybe are self-aware, but they're not taking the time to be self-aware. So, I always make a joke, like the first thing salespeople do, human beings do, they wake up and they check their cell phone. I like to call it the adult binky, the little pacifier. And so right there, they said, oh, I'm going to carve out that quiet time, which is proven, to be important for self-reflection, introspection. But I just looked at my cell phone and you know what? I've got emails coming in. I've got texts coming in, Slack, whatever the tech terms are. And so at that point, they start rushing into their day rather than reflecting on how they want to show up to the day.
So the way I phrase that when I see that is, are you driven by events or are you driving events?
There you go. Perfect way to put it. And if we don't have that self-awareness and have somebody coaching us on it, very easy for us to be being led by the events instead of choosing, this is what's important today. This is how I'm going to show up today.
So the first thing is, in order for me to improve my emotional quotient, I need to understand where I'm at now.
And that's a self-awareness. So, and self-awareness can be something as simple as being aware of the self-talk that shows up every day, right? And, and self-talk always sounds a little bit like woo and, oh, really, does it make a difference? But if you really study this, anything you think actually directs the story you believe about yourself, your product, or your company. There's an associated emotion which directs your actions. So let's take a look at a young seller. They go to terrific sales training, and there's a lot of great sales training out there. You provide great coaching. And they've been told, call on the C-suite, call on the big office. We go through, economic buyer, technical buyer, all the buyer personas. Well, the reason they're not calling at the right level is their self-talk is saying this: don't do it. That buyer, big office, big title, big questions, you're going to look stupid and get stumped. So they may not show up at all, or they start calling lower in the org chart rather than the right decision maker. That's a classic example.
Yeah, I see that. I see that all the time. I think there's a mental disparity between your value as a seller and what you perceive to be the status of the buyer as being just more important, and you're butting into their day and you're just a humble seller. I always like to correct people when they're too humble about their introduction. This comes up a lot, even from experienced salespeople. I'm calling from a company called Sales Code. So my question to them would be, would you say I'm calling from a company called Microsoft? And of course they wouldn't, would they?
Right. Right. That's a great point. Yes.
You see what I mean?
Exactly.
You're making an assumption that what you're really saying is, I'm calling from Nobby No Nuts, No Name Computing. You'll never have heard of me. You're a big, important guy. I'm sorry to butt into your day. I don't even know why I bothered phoning you in the first place, because you're not going to listen to anything I said. Right.
And you know what's really interesting with that, Kevin, is that in this day and age, more than I think ever, with all the changes we've had with the pandemic, and now you got recession, inflation, and all global unrest, your buyers are looking for competence and confidence. So if you're showing up apologetic, you've just been disqualified before you even have a discovery conversation.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Competence and confidence. I love that. That came up on a podcast I recorded yesterday. It's so interesting. I like that because when I hear something 2 or 3 times, I think, yeah, that's important, right? I've triangulated a piece of information from 3 experts. They're all telling me the same thing. Competence and confidence they're very different things, aren't they?
Well, but let's take a look at that as it relates to emotional intelligence, or EQ. See, there's no reason not to be competent today, right? We've got books, we've got podcasts like this, webinars, training you can invest in yourself. And so what's important to recognize is that it's not the knowledge, access to knowledge. It's the fact, if you are not a learner, in the EQ world, we call it self-actualization, you're not going to study that knowledge. You're not going to become masterful at the knowledge. Confidence is really self-regard in the EQ world. And that's the ability to say, you know what? Here's where I'm strong. Here's where I'm weak. And I'm going to celebrate my strengths. And at this point, I'm going to get a coach or some insight if this weakness is holding me back. But they've got the ability to say it, which means they're highly coachable. Yes. That's how you get competent. That's how you have confidence.
That's a key thing you look for if you're hiring people, I think, as a sales leader. They've got to be coachable. Everybody's got to be coachable. In fact, potentially or particularly the sales leader herself, I think. Would you agree?
Well, absolutely, because, you model the behavior consciously or unconsciously. So if you're not proactively asking for feedback from your team, did I give you enough time? Was the feedback I provided you? Admitting you made a mistake. So, you can study emotional intelligence like I do all day, every day. And you know what? I can still show up and be a jerk. I can be impatient. I can let my impulse control get in the way. So instead of trying to justify it, you just apologize. Hey, I was a jerk yesterday. I didn't bring my best self. I'm not going to give you the reasons why, but this is what I'm going to do to improve. And then you actually demonstrate that.
So is this emotional intelligence, is this something more than just having a positive attitude?
Well, we never want to discount the positive attitude, because in the EQ world, that would be called optimism. And the research is pretty clear. Optimistic salespeople will outperform their pessimistic peers. Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, did this research back in the 80s with Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and they were having terrible turnover, right? And so, great sales training program. They had their vetting process, and he said, how much are you vetting your potential candidates for optimism? And they were not. And so they incorporated that into their interview hiring process, and lo and behold, started the decrease in the turnover of salespeople, because optimism is one of the skills needed for resiliency. And I got to tell you, resilient people are the ones that bounce back, push through adversity, because their belief is you know what, this is temporary, not permanent. I can control my outcome. I'm going to learn from my failures. So this positive attitude isn't just a cliche. It is something to hire for and then continue developing on your team.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think you were touching on the growth mindset as well, weren't you? In terms of how you approach failure as part of a learning process.
Well, and what's interesting with Carol Dweck's work there, and I think what's important is that the children that were raised with a high IQ, and maybe they just had a natural affinity for getting good grades. Well, it showed later in life they weren't as resilient because everything was about, I'm smart, and therefore if I fail, there's something wrong. Whereas if you reward kids for the effort, and I would say the same thing for sales leadership. When I see a salesperson, I've seen some really talented, again, not make it. But where I will continue working with a salesperson, coaching, have a lot of patience, is if they're putting in the effort. So maybe from a languaging, they're not as quick at getting a value proposition, asking discovery questions. But I will tell you, somebody that has delayed gratification, they're coachable, they'll put in the work, they'll want to be a superstar.
Yeah. May take them a bit longer sometimes, but they'll get there, I'm sure. I think that's true. Do you think there's such a thing as toxic positivity?
Toxic positivity. Well, let me think about that. Wow, I don't get stumped on questions too much. So let me put the two words together. Well, the toxic, to me, positivity might indicate that it's not genuine. Maybe there isn't reality testing going on, that they're sitting there going, la, 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 everything's perfect. And the reality is things aren't perfect. So it's okay to say, nope, we made a mistake here, or we're getting outgunned by our competitor. So that would be called a healthy dose of reality testing. So maybe toxicity is when everything's beautiful and I'm not really willing to look at, no, here's what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's true. That would be my view as well. I think it is possible to have toxic positivity. I think sometimes it feels like that to people who are naturally of a negative mindset, and probably negative mindset. Well, I mean, it can be useful. There are, in the sales process, there are people that love looking for problems, which is a key function of consultative salespeople, right? So,
well, it's interesting. I don't know if you've been reading any of the interviews with the mathematics professor from Carnegie Mellon, Bosch and Low. I want to pronounce his name right. And really fascinating work that he's doing, because he's going out, he's a mathematics professor, but he's talking to students about how being human in the day and age of artificial intelligence is important. But here's what I really grabbed from his message. The successful person of the future is going to be able to know what problems to solve, the right problems, which is, we're just overloaded with that. But more importantly, it's problems that have never been seen, and maybe even your prospects or customers don't know. So I find that whole concept of his, that's who's going to be valuable, which is critical thinking skills. It's slowing down, applying a problem solving, looking past the presenting problem. So
he's selling these days. Is it an art or a science or what then, do you think? We're talking about AI and salespeople now. Where do you stand on that scale?
It's both. When you take a look at the science part, might be what you call the structure. It can be called the neuroscience, emotional regulation, showing empathy, because one of the things I'm curious about is with the tech tools that will be able to pop up and say, okay, here's the emotion of your prospect. Well, if the emotion of the prospect is frustration, well, what we've got to teach our salespeople is not to get derailed by that frustration or real world empathy there. But problem solving skills takes delayed gratification, because if we're going to be solving problems that ChatGPT can't solve because they've never been solved, that's what ChatGPT is good at, right? Well, I got to tell you, that's, again, according to this mathematics professor, he says that takes creative thinking. Here's the key word: thinking. No one takes time to think. And so the problem is there's going to have to be a big shift in corporate America to where we're encouraging people to think instead of running back-to-back sales calls, which I see all the time with video calls.
No,
So
we're
that was
not
a
thinking,
long
we're just
answer.
reacting to situations. So again, we're not driving events, we're being driven by events.
Yeah. And for some, in thinking, this is why I get some of my best ideas when I go out for my hike. And it might be an idea for a blog, a content, or a different way of looking at things. But somebody might be saying, well, that hike is kind of a waste of time. Now, it's obviously good for, your physical health, but it's actually where a lot of creativity happens.
Do you listen to any like a podcast when you're hiking?
No, I do not. I know a
Right.
lot of people do. I want my brain free, and I'll listen to podcasts in the car, but nope, I simply want that brain free. And it's amazing the ideas that come to me, new ways, new perspectives. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you. Try and do that as well. Unplug. We're
Yeah,
consumed by demands for our time, aren't we?
well, we are. And that's where, if you go back to belief systems, as sales leaders, you have to have a belief system that carving out quiet time is good for you as a leader. And so this is where, a lot of times, and I know you're really well versed on this, Kevin, we will, if you look at a triangle, beliefs drive your actions, beliefs drive the skills you apply. Well, here's what I encourage people. Sometimes you have to do it before you believe it. You literally have to say, I'm carving out quiet time and all my work's going to get done. And I'm going to take the time to calendar block. Salespeople, they've known about time management for years. Well, the problem is to really manage your calendar so you're driving the events. It's about 45 minutes at the end of the week, really blocking out that week. So
the EQ concept again, then, salespeople being extremely competitive. Can you grade yourself on an EQ scale? And there's a kind of an idea that IQ is fixed, right? I think there's some debate about that now, but broadly, mostly, I suppose. But EQ, can you improve your scores and gain the scores and become more self-aware? Can you do that? And if so, who do you measure yourself against?
Well, number one, you can improve your emotional intelligence skills. There's the caveat. With focus and commitment, and in some cases, an outside mentor or coach, because again, that what you're not aware of, you cannot change. So maybe the coach, a trusted friend, can say, well, you think you're demonstrating empathy, but what I'm really seeing is you're just checking the box because you're saying, oh, I understand your frustration. Many people think that's empathy. That's not empathy. True empathy is when you can state why they're frustrated. But see, that requires thinking. It's not a check the box statement or phrase. And then what was the second part of the question there? So you say, can it be learned? And what was the second part?
Can you measure yourself? If you're competitive, salespeople are enormously competitive generally, right? It's a performance sport, really, selling, in my view. If you're competitive, you want to measure yourself against other people. So is there a way of benchmarking yourself against others? Say, well, I'm improving, I'm gaining in this skill.
Well, here's what my encouragement would be. Don't compete against other people on EQ. This is a self-improvement project. The second, if you want measurements, there's a variety of emotional intelligence assessments out there that the paper will say, here's where you started. Maybe with 6 months of coaching, self-awareness, reflection, you could retake that. But you could also do it very simply by how is your life changing? How is business changing? And then pay attention to the qualitative and the quantitative, because I get asked the question a lot, Kevin, well, what's the return on investment? And that's a fair question. And my first kind of snarky answer is, have you ever worked with a jerk? Okay. Put that on a profit and loss statement. I mean, the morale, the emotional contagion that happens, turnover that you don't even know happens because somebody doesn't like working for this leader or with his peer.
But here's another question for you. I'm interested in how this goes down with sales leaders, thinking about salespeople. In my experience as a sales leader, we always put a lot of time and effort into coaching opportunities. Well, actually, I'm going to rephrase that. Inspecting opportunities is mostly what we do a lot of, not really coaching them. But anyway, there's focus on zooming into a sales forecast, looking at the big opportunity, saying, where is that? Can we tick a box off to see if you've got all the right bells and whistles attached to this? Is it going to land when you say it's going to land? Is it the value you say it's going to be? All that kind of stuff. When we start thinking about salespeople, though, and suggesting that we should be investing time and money in trying to understand them as individuals and help them to improve their emotional quotient, how does that go down with your clients? Is that something that sales leaders are now buying into?
Not all sales leaders. Some are still very much into what I would call deal review, which is what you call deal inspection. Yeah. Let's look at the numbers in the selling stages, close ratios, etc. Now, numbers are important. If you don't know your numbers, you don't know where to coach. But here's the difference. Deal review never changes the numbers. Deal coaching changes the number. Now, we all know this. Get on the web, look at the research, plenty of data to show a coach team will outperform a non-coach team. So this is where the sales leader has to reflect. And number one, are they really honoring the coaching time? I know I worked with a sales manager last year, and he had come from LinkedIn. Their coaching hours were directly linked to their bonus. That's how serious they took coaching.
Was it real coaching they were doing? Was it proper coaching? Or?
They were probably, without knowing it, I think doing a little deal review coaching, because most managers don't know how to deal coach. No. See, deal coach is, okay, it's one thing to identify you've got a problem in this selling stage. Let's say it's discovery. Well, why aren't they asking enough questions? Are they moving past the presenting problem? What's the reason they're not? Maybe they're not asking for a meeting with the right decision maker. So if you're not asking for a meeting with the right decision maker, a lot of times that boils down to lack of assertiveness. You lack the ability to state what you need nicely. You've got fear playing into it. Well, I don't want to rock the boat, so I'm going to go along to get along here, and you write a practice proposal. And so that's a whole different type of coaching. So some of it can be tactical coaching, but also coaching that emotional where if a salesperson isn't spending enough time pre-call planning, hello, get on the internet. It tells you to pre-call plan. Well, this person's having impulse control problems, all right? Maybe they don't know how to pre-call plan. They don't know what to research. They don't know how to convert the research into a compelling question. So, coaching is really a skill that more managers need some help with, and it's not their fault. They simply get promoted, and then all of a sudden, I'm supposed to be this great coach.
Yeah, I kind of think that as AI takes over more of the scientific part of selling, that it's going to liberate salespeople to be truly human again. And that this kind of approach to getting the best out of yourself as an individual, so you can bring your best to the client, is going to become more popular. Now, that just could be, in my mind, that could be wishful thinking on my part, because I've found all of this approach to understanding yourself. I use the Gallup Strengths Finder for my own business, because that's just been enormously powerful in that context. I'm hoping that that's where it's going to go. I wonder what your thoughts are. Am I being overly optimistic?
Well, I don't think you're being overly optimistic. I think you're spot on. If we don't know how to lean into, and I'm not the first one to say this, so it's probably not my original thought, but if you don't know how to lean into what makes humans humans, then you will be replaced. And so this could be pure likability. This could be, sometimes people say, well, what do sellers want, right? Do you remember that movie, What Do Women Want?
With Mel Gibson. Yeah, great movie.
Well, you know what? In my opinion, you know what buyers want? They don't want any BS. They are tired of it. They are skeptical. So if you really don't learn how to show up, and I almost hate to use this buzzword, authentic, well, you've just gotten disqualified because you can't even get past the likability stage of selling.
But you definitely can't be authentic if you don't understand yourself. That's for sure.
Well, and if you're sitting there and you haven't mastered, so let's talk about the hard selling skills, very important. But if you haven't mastered those skills, here's what I find. You're showing up to the meeting. Kevin, you're a big decision maker. And I'm sitting there and subconsciously, I'm kind of, well, what's my next move? What's my next question? Now look at my face. Well, you're not present. And so if you don't master the selling skills, compelling, whatever, provocative questions, whatever we want to call them, you're not present in that call and your buyer knows it. And they don't want to be meeting with somebody that's not 100% present. You've just wasted their time.
Completely. Absolutely agree with you. So you're finding sales leaders are prepared to invest in deal coaching. You're finding increasingly they're prepared to invest in EQ for salespeople. What are your thoughts on the salespeople themselves? You said it's important for a salesperson to be a learner. Do you think that younger salespeople, if you like, the people now coming into the sales profession that you and I have been in for a while, are they prepared to invest their own time and sometimes their own money in improving themselves in these areas?
I would say, and it's an answer that's not real fair, yes and no. And this is where you've got to go back to your hiring process, because what you want to look for is, number one, examples of when the person has invested in their own learning. Because, let's say for young sellers, they're coming right out of college. Well, learning was forced on them. You're going to get a grade. And if you can find examples of when they learn just to learn, that's an example of somebody that is probably going to continue on that path. I would say the other thing to look for with young sales professionals is initiative. We live in the day and age where you've got helicopter parents, and it's really not even the young professionals' fault, because I'm older than you, but I grew up in the age where you still had a phone hooked to the wall. Okay. And so if you were out and about, you could not call your parents for advice. You just learned initiative without great parenting. And so what we have to be aware of is you want to vet these candidates for initiative. Like an interview question I've taught is, tell me about a time when you took on a project where you got no guidance or resources. See, I'm looking for scrappy. I'm looking for initiative, and I'm not looking for somebody that's bitter that they didn't get any help and such.
I love that question. Love that question. Could you repeat it? What was the question again?
The question was, tell me about a time when you had to take on a project and you got no guidance, no support, or resources. So past behavior is your best indicator of future results. I'm looking for somebody that's taken on something and figured it out. So that tells you initiative. It tells you resiliency. Like I said, it tells you a little bit about entitlement on the answer they give, because if they're still bitter, well, then you might have somebody that anytime they have to take initiative, they're going to be upset. And I have to tell you, for some people, if you're going to work for a startup like I did, you have to have a ton of initiative because systems and processes aren't in place. You have to learn to work workarounds and not get bogged down by them.
Absolutely. Well, listen, it's been a great conversation. We're going to have to kind of bring it in for a safe landing. I've got 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
Now, these are the killer questions. Are you okay? So I've teed you up for this. Hopefully you're ready. Obviously, you're a busy lady. You've got a lot on your plate. You run a business, you employ people, you coach, you're still a chief salesperson for the company that you started. I'm really interested to know what you do at the end of a busy day, even a bad day. Days haven't gone your way. Let's assume that doesn't happen every day, because otherwise you probably would have done something else by now. But occasionally we all have a bad day, right? Even though most resilient people have a bad day. What is it you do to unwind at the end of a subpar day, let's call it?
Well, it's interesting. I actually get a better end of the day because of how I start my day. And that may not be the answer you want here, but I am very intentional about carving out quiet time in the morning. And that is to mentally get me checked, to reflect on what happened yesterday. Did I allow something to emotionally trigger me? Did I not show up very well? Was I sloppy on a call? Maybe I lacked recall planning. So I think because I start my day differently, the whole day runs better. Now, at the end of the day, what I do is I always calendar block my entire week. And if I've overbooked, even with good calendar blocking and time management, then I'm updating and I'm getting ready for the next day. So when I close my door, I am done for the day. And then we do something very simple. My husband and I both love movies. We love watching television. So call us a couch potato. So we have these series of TV. So we'll watch like 1 hour of some kind of TV series. And for us, it just allows us to check out and check into the evening.
What's your favorite movie that relates to selling?
Oh, interesting. Favorite movie. I'm going to give an easy answer, but I don't think if I had more time, I would say it's Tommy Boy, but it's because we show that clip so often in our training where he was taught to, never take no for an answer. So I do find Tommy Boy just quite a funny movie.
Tommy Boy. I never heard of it. Who's in that?
Oh my gosh. I can see the actors and I can't tell you their names. It's you. I would suggest everyone watch it. It's Chris. He was a comedian.
Not Chris Rock.
No, it wasn't Chris Rock.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a bit of a curveball question. Never asked anybody that before. Just that you're obviously so fluent at this stuff. I just thought I'd try and trip you up.
Yeah, it's just a great clip, and it flies in the face of how you should sell, but how people are taught to sell. Yes, like keep pushing, always be closing. And when you watch it, there's the scene in which he just implodes the prospect's brain. So it's quite humorous.
Right, love it. Well, so the last question is a piece of wisdom for you to pass back to your younger self, Colleen. What's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that you picked up along the way?
So I would say if I could give advice to apply proactively, and the key here is proactively seek out mentors. Now, let me be very clear. I have been blessed with great mentors. I can recite 10 that have made a huge difference in my life. But I also find what would have happened had I proactively maybe sought out mentors for a specific area. But otherwise, I've always been a really good student. I have an extremely big work ethic from growing up on an Iowa farm. I would encourage anybody, do not discount the power of work. And I think we're kind of having some of these conversations, work-life balance. And, I'm a little mixed on it because, if you're a young sales professional, when I tell my 20-something-year-olds, I'm like, work, raise your hand, ask for extra responsibility. You will never have more time and energy on your hands. So burn it and you'll be in a position where you get to have balance later.
Great answer. I love that. I'm told the new thing is not work-life balance because it's unrealistic. I mean, the truth is, I've got 2 grown-up daughters. If something happened, if one of my daughters phoned me now and said she needed help, I'd drop this call, bin this.
Right.
You'd understand. And we'd get on. That's work-life integration, isn't it? It's not really a balance. I still spend most of my busy hours working effectively, but it's integrating everything and doing it at the right time. I completely agree with you.
And there's sometimes you're going to be wildly out of balance. I was we do some reinforcement virtual workshops for a client of mine, and I'll just call him Simon. Shows up. I said, Simon, you look really tired, and he said, newborn baby. Oh, you know what? There is no way you have balance when that little miracle has entered your house. You just can't. You know what? That's called life.
It is. And that's a wrap. It's been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Colleen.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me as your guest.
And thank you to the listener. Please do leave us a review if you like this conversation because it helps enormously to boost the ratings.